Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin here with my inimitable co-host Teos Abadia, who's not at all loopy.
No. I had my COVID and flu shots, and I understand you did as well.
I did. That's why we are so excited to be here, unflued, uncovided,
Hmm.
and ready to do this thing.
Oh, fantastic.
And so we'll get right into it. We'll get right into our listener corner. I'm just going to say one thing first, though, is, we love to hear that we're wrong, because when we hear we're wrong, that means we've learned something. But in order to tell us we're wrong, you have to show your work. Uh,
Mm.
if we get a rule wrong, or if we say something that's wrong, absolutely tell us about it on Facebook, on Twitter, on Mastodon, on Blue Sky, on YouTube. Tell us on all the places, but just sort of show your work. Say, yeah, you missed this on page 17 of the player's handbook. You said this, and see, there it is. And then we learn. If you just say you guys got everything wrong, but you don't tell us what we got wrong or how we got it wrong, we don't know.
Yeah, and
So
then leave your
teach us
address so we can find you and tell you how we
and
feel about it. No.
tell you in person how happy we are and how pleased we
No.
are that you're teaching us. Now you don't have to do that, but seriously, yeah, let us
Yeah.
know. We love to hear from you, just like we heard from these folks. First, we heard from Victor Navone via Twitter. I hope I pronounced that right. I'm sorry, Victor, if I didn't, and you can correct me. Why do you think WotC doesn't release adventure modules for D&D? It seems like they could sell a lot of small, softcover adventures at a cheaper price point, and DMs would get to sample content from different campaigns without having to invest money in a hardcover book. And this is a great question, and it goes to some things that we've talked about in the past. And the short answer is I don't know for sure why they don't. I don't have access to the market research that they do. I don't have access to their internal numbers, both in terms of their audience, but also in terms of the projects that they're working on. But I do have some general observations, and I will make them, and I will let Teos add his or correct me if he's seen something different than I have in this. And so the first thing is, when you sell player content or even like lore, world information, you sell to a large percentage of your potential audience. When you sell adventures, you sell to a much, much, much smaller percentage of your potential audience, because think of it this way: if there are 6 players and 1 DM, generally you are then selling to 1 in every 7 people when you sell an adventure, as opposed to 7 out of 7 or 6 out of 7. So that's one thing right there. uh Teos, any other thoughts on this question along these lines?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely spot on. If you look at 5e, which has done really well on its adventure sales compared to the sales of modules and previous attempts at TSR, when we compare those numbers, it looks like 5e is gangbusters better for most releases. And I think that's because these big releases include player content, they include setting information, they include the adventure, they include monsters, magic items, spells, backgrounds. All of that entices more people to buy it as this bigger item. And so they don't want a few small sales. They want everybody in the D&D sphere to want to buy this one release that they're doing to validate all of that print and distribution cost and all of that you see. So I think that's really what's at the heart of it, is that bigger is actually a wider audience and therefore better.
Another thing is that printing and distribution is expensive, even if it's a small softcover. You are paying a printer to print, you are paying distributors to distribute, you are paying everybody along the way. So you can say, well, hardcovers are so much more expensive than softcovers. Yes, but small softcovers are still expensive, and that doesn't include paying the people to make them, which is also an expense. Uh, you still either have to pay freelancers to do the work, you have to pay your staff to, instead of working on this, work on this.
Yeah.
A project that I'm wrapping up right now, I'm not going to talk about it for NDA reasons, but it's on the smaller side. It took me probably 4 times as many hours as I thought it would take. And it brought into the project so many more people than I thought there would be involved in giving feedback, in editing, in commenting on different parts of it. If this is a tiny, tiny project compared to a huge, 256 page hardcover book, and it took that much to do it, then you're still paying a lot more than you're probably making, even if you make a 32 page, a 16 page small module, in the sense of, we called them back in first edition days, where you'd get, the 32 page Steading of the Hill Giant Chief, soft cover module. Thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that you again want to operate on such a large scale. Like D&D wants to operate on a brand level, right? Not on a small individual module level. And so releasing some small adventure isn't that helpful to D&D as a brand. They want big, huge, banner-sized announcements of Planescape, right? All those videos you see right now that we're going to talk about, drumming up all this interest. That's the kind of thing they want. And they want the stories that they release to register at a big scale, right? I mean, they can't quite get to the Marvel level, but that's what they'd like to be at, where they announce a thing, whether it's a TV show, a movie, a book, or whatever, and that everybody pays attention to it, writ large, big scale, feels enormous, feels bigger than anything someone else could do. Releasing small modules is sort of what everybody else does, right?
Mm-hmm. And this gets us to sort of the sad truth about publishing in general, is that, especially in tabletop role-playing games, prices are too low. Prices are way, way too low. To actually make money on say a 32 page short module that you would buy in a store like you used to, they would have to charge a price that would cause a revolt. And people would say, "Oh, money grab, money grab. Oh, look, they're charging you $25 for this little 32 page thing." That's what they would have to charge to make it even close to remotely profitable for them. And then you get a revolt. What are the alternatives? Put out an inferior product, right? Without all the art, without all the editing, without all the care that goes into it. Even if they put a lot of care into it, even if we as game designers put a lot of care into things, there are still problems and people still complain. But at this level, you're cutting out editing and development and art and layout. You're cutting out a lot of that stuff, and you would get a product that would actually be worth the pittance that is charged for an adventure. And people would be unhappy because it didn't look good, but then they would be unhappy if you charge too much. And it's not worth it, especially at the level that Wizards is at.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, unfortunately, because it is neat, but that's where the rest of the industry comes in and provides those kinds of small, tiny experiences, right? D&D, if they release a short adventure, it's going to be in a box set, or it's going to be part of a setting book. So it's up to other companies to fill that space.
Yeah, and that makes a great point, that there are those adventures there now. There are those modules there now. They're all over the DM's Guild. And Wizards could take advantage of this. They sort of do already without trying, because without putting one tiny lick of work in, they are making money on those things. It's not a lot in the large scale, but it's something. But they could say, well, you want your 32 page module? It's right there on the DM's Guild. Let us advertise it for you. Oh, look, here are 10 adventures. Look at Ashes of Athos or Oracle of War, right? Oracle of War is at least 20 plus adventure series that takes characters from levels 1 to 20. It's sitting there ready for Eberron players to play it. If Wizards of the Coast just pushed it a bit and said, "Hey, we're sponsoring this," well, which they did, right? They did sponsor it, but they're not taking advantage of it. That could be your thing. Oh, we're going to do a print on demand, and now you can print it. You can print each individual adventure. You get 32 pages adventure for, $10 or get the whole thing. But it's still not worth it for them to do that in the long run, right? It still doesn't, the amount of work they would have to put in to do that would not even start to pay for the time and the effort that it would take to do it. It's an industry thing that makes it hard for us to get what we want within a reasonable price.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, it's worth remembering that those days of TSR having, Walden Books and other stores in your mall filled with all those modules, that wasn't a profitable model. It was based on a lot of problems behind the scenes that you can read about in some of the latest historical books, but that was not based on a model of profitability. It was based on some really bizarre math that TSR was playing with rather than it being a sound model. So it's never really been something that works.
For sure. So thank you for that question, Victor. I hope that helps, at least with that specific aspect of your question. And we have George PR via Mastodon, who says, I really like D&D. There are some rough edges that I dislike, and I keep thinking about designing my own game. I realize, though, that this makes no logical sense, as designing a game is a huge undertaking and D&D is pretty great. How do you know when to build something new or just to modify it? As designers, do you just take D&D as it is, or do you have house rules to shave down the areas you don't like? Yes, and yes.
Yeah. I mean, I played around with all kinds of weird things when I was young. As a way of sort of cutting my teeth on these kinds of things, I would make all kinds of house rules to my D&D. I took Shadowrun and I converted it to the D&D rules because I didn't really like how the rules worked in the original Shadowrun. So I had this weird Shadowrun to D&D conversion. I created a whole like Dune part of Dark Sun once that used all these weird rules. As long as you're having fun, it's all good. It just is a ton of work. And you have to work through, at least in my case, do a lot of work to try to get it to be even reasonably decent for my friends. Could I do a better job? Maybe, but I tend to think that now I would be way too thorough around it. So I tend not to try to do that because I will spiral out of control on what I might start designing. And I don't see myself as an RPG designer in terms of core mechanics and things like that. So I don't generally, I'm not attracted to that like I am adding components or rule systems, subsystems, things like that to a game. So I tend to just focus on that when I'm modifying things. I'll add areas to an existing rule set rather than modify and build my own. What do you think, Shawn?
I am the same way, right? As a kid, I had my group loved D&D and they loved Top Secret, which was a super spy James Bond sort of game.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would run one and we'd run a few sessions of Top Secret. And then I'm like, why am I doing both? Why don't I just mix these two? So we had the Top secret agents who find a time machine and they go back in time and we start using D&D rules and a bridge between the two. And then some assassins are sent, player character assassins are sent to kill the player character time traveling spies. And then they're all interacting and ogre mages are coming out and attacking. And it's just it was chaos, but it was fun.
Yeah.
And what you can do is when you are a DM who wants to make a version of a game that you and your players love, you can work and build from the chassis of 5e or whatever game you're choosing. That chassis is built to be solid but flexible. As long as you don't mess with the core rules, with the game loop, with the core mechanics, you have that flexibility to go far afield and start adding on bits of those cogs to your machine and still have a functional game, or at least functional for your group. And that's the important part. If you want to make something larger that other people can play, then you have to start getting into that huge undertaking, because now you have to test everything, not just for your group who kind of hand waves things and rolls with it, but it has to work for everyone. And it needs to be adjustable for what they want to do with it as well. And so that's why, you know, there's game design and then there's game design. All DMs are game designers
Hmm.
because everyone has their own little tweaks and rules, and or most people.
Hmm.
Some people run it strictly by the book, and that's okay too. But lots of people have their own little things. But if you are building your own machine from the ground up, starting with nuts and bolts and screws and plates, then you're in for a long
Yeah.
journey.
And you could also do is kind of sit down and look at like what are the things that annoy you about D&D,
Mhm.
right? So those are the lists of problems you want to solve or eradicate, something that you want to change there in that category. And then look at other games and how do they handle that differently and or better? And is that something that you can just sort of port over? Right? It is something like bringing in chase mechanics from a different game or a skill resolution system maybe that you could port over, but that the rest of it would still be intact. Or should you start from another game and maybe port
Mhm.
D&D into that other game, right? And that's where
Right.
the more that you play other fantasy games, if you're thinking of D&D, then you get that feel for how it can be so different to run a 13th Age or a Shadow of the Demon Lord or uh, one of the free league games, right? Like as you kind of do that, then you can kind of see, well, what I want out of my play experience, and do I want to port things over or start from there?
And that's why we've looked at other games in past episodes. And that's why in this episode, we are going to continue that trend and we are going to look at the 2D20 system and some of the games that use that and what it means for gameplay at your tables.
Yeah.
So, George PR, thank you so much. We are going to continue this discussion with that later in the episode. But first, we need to get to a little bit of news and commentary. The first bit of news being Planescape Adventures in the Multiverse. Yeah, it's coming soon. Fandelver and below, we hardly knew you. Planescape, here we come.
Yeah. That's the
So
way it
we
is,
have,
Sean.
I know, we have a ton of videos
Can I just say,
coming on
Sean, just
Wizards. Yeah.
to put this into context, there are 5 releases from D&D in 4 months. That's how bottlenecked everything became at the end of the year versus we only had keys for a really long time at the beginning of the year. So somehow, for whatever various reasons, OGL, other reasons, it all became compressed at the end of the year. And, we still have one more release after Planescape. So
Yep. So, what have we learned about Planescape from these videos and from other sources? Well, we've seen the covers, including the friendly local gaming store version by Tony Di Terlizzi, who,
yeah.
if you are familiar with the old second edition Planescape books, you are familiar with Tony's work. We already knew that there was a slipcase involved with a DM screen, a map, and a $3 set, a setting book called Sigil and the Outlands, a monster book called Mort's Planar Parade, and an adventure called Turn of Fortune's Wheel. So with that we knew, and now we have videos, lots and lots of videos. Teos took one for the team, and he watched the videos.
I
You don't
did.
read the comments, but you always watch the videos.
Yeah, there were a
Tell us,
lot of
Teos.
there were a lot of spoilers. So if you are a player, be careful with these videos. They say things that I kind of wish they didn't in terms of if you want to experience that adventure. They obviously spoil what's in the setting book too, but there are the videos are full of spoilers about the adventures, like key fundamental things at a high
Mhm.
level. What we've learned, and by I should say that if you want to go to Blue Sky and check out, Brandis Stoddard has all kinds of pictures that he's shared because he got an early copy and has been sharing that this last weekend, I think it was, or maybe even Friday. So you can see the table of contents and everything. But at a high level, we see that first and foremost, the Wizards of the Coast team has decided that it is now Sigil and not Sigil.
I
Um,
I appreciate that. I'm still going to call it Sigil,
yeah.
and we'll always call it Sigil. And I know I'm wrong, and I will continue to do so.
They claim to have some, certainty from back in the day. I don't know. I remember talking to Keith Baker about Sire Siri and that area of Eberron, and he said, "Well, I always thought about a Siri, but now I don't like that because of the obvious
Mhm.
iPhone interaction. So therefore, Sire maybe is the most sensical." So there are reasons to change it. Anyway, Sigil plays a strong role in the adventure and setting. In fact, if you look at the table of contents for the setting book, it is Sigil and the Outlands. So it's actually a lot like if you go back and listen to that episode where we talked about the Modron March adventure. That's a lot of what we're seeing here, right? Going through all of those gate towns, talking about the Outlands, talking about the areas of the city. That's the focus. It's not about the Plane of Fire. It's not about, the Nine Hells or anything like that. It really is about these gate towns,
Mhm.
Outlands, Sigil. Um, we get to see lots of art in these videos and focusing on the gate towns a lot. The idea that each of these is colored by the energy of or characteristics of the plane that it borders. We get 16 towns that are detailed, many with new levels of detail or a fresh take. This is another case, as we've seen with various other older settings coming back, where the team was not shy about making some changes where they felt it was needed. Um, and yeah, and so we see that all of these towns given it a new look or a fresh eye, the way that they did Ravenloft in Van Richten's, and they looked at those different domains and made some changes. All kinds of monsters, cranium rats, dark weavers, modron types, of various of the species that were really kind of big in the Planescape handbook. Um, the adventure, again, there are a lot of spoilers. I won't repeat them here other than to say that there are surprises as to how it begins. I think it's a really cool premise. And that premise creates an immediate mystery that resolves specifically around the characters and how they relate to the setting of Planescape. I think that's a really neat idea. Resolving that mystery, which is spoiled in the videos, will result in the end of the adventure being a high level experience. That's something they've talked about before. So you get both kind of lowish levels and then high level play, which is kind of neat idea. I think a lot of groups will enjoy how that plays out. And the videos talk about the factions. And did you play Planescape, Shawn? Were you familiar with that setting?
Not second edition versions.
Mhm.
No.
Yeah, I didn't either. It was one of those things that as a kid, I was like, I only have so much money. I'm saying no to Planescape. And I always thought it was very quirky. I was more of a manual planes type person rather than a sigil outlands factions type thing. But the factions are a huge part of the flavor of the setting historically. And there have been originally, I think, 15 factions. Now there are 12. There's a book that came out, Faction War, where various factions fell apart and were combined and things like that. So some of that is carried forward now in this new version, and some of it goes back to the original. So again, they've given it a fresh look. Our show notes kind of list the various ones that are here. It's either going to mean a lot to you or not, but they've combined. I took my guesses as to what I'm seeing as to how they're combining things, but there is a section in the book that says minor factions, so maybe some of those appear there. The point of factions is to give you a real sense of how the city operates, the different power structures, and the ethos behind each of these factions, right? Like super lawful or super chaotic, and to ground that in the space of the city physically with these different entities that are kind of vying for power and operating things in their particular way.
Mhm. Yeah, we've had discussions about factions in the past and what they can add to a game, and sort of the original Forgotten Realms factions of, right, Order of the Gauntlet, the
Yeah.
Harpers, Zentarum, etc. They were such a highlight of the game, and then they went away, or they got much less coverage. And now we're getting hit with 12 factions plus some minor factions. It'll be interesting to see if there's anything about them that actually play into the story, or
Hmm.
if it's just these are the factions, now you DM, you do what you want with them based on your player choices.
Yeah.
uh, but I've always been interested in Planescape, but it hit me at the exact wrong time of my gaming career, right
Hmm.
when I stopped playing, and then it came out, so I never got back into it. But I've always loved that idea of these gate towns.
Hmm.
And I think you can have so much fun with those without going to an extreme. without, you are in limbo now.
Right.
It's like you are in a limbo light state
Yeah.
here, and we can play around with that and have fun with that. And it's so ripe for both story focused players and mechanics focused players,
Yeah.
because you can do cool things with both. So I think it's a good direction that they're heading, with the caveat that I still haven't seen the book,
Right.
but have it on pre-order. So let's get this going.
It's nice to see this book in the table of credits has a number of interesting things. One is that they say they have a managing editor and an editorial department. That's always interesting.
Mhm.
Sort of reinstating that from before. Justice Ramin Arman is one of the leads, along with Wes Snyder. So in the past, the leads have been, if you remember that old studio blog, the studio blog kind of said, project leads will be people at this level, right? I forget what the name of it was, but it was like the project directors or something like that. And it was a set of people that would do that. But here we have Justice working at that high level. So that's really cool. And then we see, like folks like Dan Dillon working on the rules and PC options side. He had a nice video where he talked about the Gate Warden background and the Planar Philosopher background, feats that have an attempt to create role playing hooks through those different feats. There's one that's Scion of the Outer Planes that unlocks other feats, new spells, new magic items. A lot of it is around the idea of, hey, you've got a planar gate. Can you return to it? Can you find it again? Can you open one that's closed? Can you close one that's open? Things like that. The Mimir, a floating skull that can provide information for you. I'm a big fan of that kind of approach.
Mhm.
So yeah, the videos are neat from a design perspective. You just have to be careful about those spoilers. And one thing that I thought was really fascinating, and I'd like to see how they handle this. It was I think a challenge in the past. Sigil is described as a sort of Times Square, and the Outlands is this wild, incredible place. And all of these experiences, sort of everything turned up to 11. And that can be hard to sustain. And I'm curious whether they give you advice on how to sustain that being interesting and not becoming the background, right? That can be a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
So how do you make this melting pot really come out? And so the first time you describe like, oh, there's a cafe and you have a diva and a devil, hanging out, having a conversation, but where do you go from there, right? How do you keep that
Mhm.
fresh and interesting? We'll see if they tell you.
Yeah. Yep. And so all of these videos, or many of these videos, are linked in our show notes, but you can just find them by going to YouTube and searching on Wizards of the Coast and Planescape. And the Neverwinter MMO will likely have a Planescape edition, but not this year, or so we are hearing.
Yeah, I was very
You're the
surprised.
MMO folk here. What do you have to say?
So I was surprised that there was an interview where they said, oh yeah, we'll have it, but not this year. And I thought, okay, interesting. I wonder what the next release will be. And they said, well, it's gonna be Light of Xeraxis,
Mhm.
Spelljammer. I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
But sometimes Neverwinter has done that where the MMO has gone to, something from before, and sometimes it's completely like Tomb of Annihilation was concurrent with Tomb of Annihilation in tabletop, but sometimes they go back and pick things up. So they're apparently going to go back to Spelljammer. In fact, there are some early previews showing, you can be on the deck of a ship in wild space. So that'll be neat to see. Um, Worth also mentioning that you can get 12 faction recruitment posters on D&D Beyond as downloads that are kind of fun. So you can, use those as handouts in your game.
Nice. Well, we go from the outer reaches of the multiverse in Planescape to deep underground, sort of, in Minecraft. The Minecraft D&D DLC and the free Lightning Keep adventure are now available. Teos, take it away.
Yeah, I was kind of, wait, what? A Minecraft release now? Like, didn't that happen a while back? But it's because now Minecraft has actually released that DLC D&D content that we heard about way back when. So in a video, the designers say this is the first Minecraft DLC to be story driven of any Minecraft DLC. The goal of completing a true story with a beginning, middle, and end. It's a kind of hilarious video because the partner guy constantly interrupts the main Minecraft company guy. and says constantly things like, we were able to overcome the shortcomings of Minecraft kind of over and over again. So I found it like the most hilarious like video of like, oh man, someone talk to you.
Yeah.
But we saw scenes from Icewind Dale on Aurora Borealis to kind of create the experience there. YouTube video shows off a dragon sitting on a hoard of coins. And they did many firsts for this DLC: voiceovers to create a narrative and emotional immersion, stats, classes, a bunch of things that they added to the experience. Combat was reworked to provide more of a tabletop feel. Your class gives you 2 special abilities, things like that. And then on the tabletop side, to sort of celebrate this, we get a free download of Lightning Keep, an adventure for 4 to 6 PCs of 3rd level. Chris Perkins in a video talked about how it uses the Minecraft monsters, how he was struck by lightning once. This was apparently part of the inspiration. And I mean, if anyone's surprised that Chris Perkins was struck by lightning, I mean, it just sort of makes sense. So,
yeah. He's got the leap year birthday, February 29th. It all makes sense. It's all coming together.
So link to that, find it on D&D Beyond, and you can still claim those Minecraft monsters if you never downloaded those and want to do that. So that's all still available.
It's all still there. From things that are available to things that aren't. We heard that Evil Genius Games is suing Netflix over the license to Rebel Moon being pulled. So what happened here, apparently, allegedly, is that Netflix hired Evil Genius to create a role-playing game based on their Rebel Moon movie that's coming out. And so work was done. A game was made. Not only was a game made, but the people at Evil Genius created this huge world Bible that filled the entire world universe in this Rebel Moon setting that wasn't there.
Yeah.
And we've seen that in the past, is the role-playing game version of something adds so much to a universe that then the movie or the book industry picks up and continues with.
Star Wars is a great example.
Star Wars, perfect example of this. So everybody was happy. Netflix was getting the Rebel Moon role-playing game plus this world book that they would be able to use. And then Netflix, claiming a breach of NDA protocols, canceled the license and the game, but kept the story Bible that had been created, which by all accounts was massive.
And then said, but we'll give you 50 grand for it, which is a sort of strange, like, we're keeping this, it's ours, but we'll pay you for it. And, Evil Genius is, they are backed by venture capital. So I think that venture capital firm said no and decided, let's fund something else, which is suing Netflix, because we understand the value of this that we've written. So
yeah,
it'll be interesting to watch. And it's another story about the perils of this industry and how there's no free lunch out there, right? You think like, oh, I got a great deal working with Netflix. Well, maybe.
Yeah, and if Evil Genius was not funded by venture capital, if it was just out there, making money by selling books online or in stores or digitally, there's no way that they would have been able to create this lawsuit and actually see it through. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on this for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, well, and this is going to be a warning to, we've seen a couple of other cases where RPGs have had there's going to be a TV show, there's going to be a whatever, and it's a reminder to those companies that you really want to nail down what can happen with everything that you create and how many properties they can create off of it, right? Because if they own this, Netflix own this story Bible, they've canceled your game, you've got no income, and they can do whatever they want with that. Launch countless, books, novels, video games,
other role-playing games,
their own role-playing game later. Yeah. So
that's a thing that we will keep an eye on. We wanted to say happy birthday, not to a person, but to a wiki. The Forgotten Realms Wiki is 18 years old, and it has been a fantastic source of lore and information since 2005. So if you are a Forgotten Realms fan who has relied on the FR Wiki to keep you in the know, wish them a happy birthday.
Yeah, amazing. Time flies.
What's happening in France, Teos?
Oh, well, the most important thing is for sure that workers are building a castle from scratch following the traditional 13th century methods. And there's a fantastic NPR article on this castle being built in France. The whole surrounding like village area is influenced by this. Many locals have taken up traditional jobs. There are, tours coming through and all this kind of thing to try to fund it because it's a very long project. But you can see pictures of it too, like they're building the walls and turrets and things like that. And my favorite quote is NPR asks these two kids from a nearby village if they're interested in doing a job of this kind of traditional 13th century kind of job someday. And one boy says, "Yes, I've always wanted to be a stone carver." "Not me," says another. "I'm going to be a YouTuber."
What was the 13th century version of YouTuber? I'm wondering. Town crier.
Yeah, the town crier. That would be great.
Tavern.
Yeah, the person who puts the postings up on the bard.
Yeah. We'd love to hear your analogies out there in mastering Dungeons land. And finally, we have our creator and crowdfunding news. We've got one book to highlight here. It's Vecna's Book of Vile Darkness. For $20, you get 140 pages of content, including 13 new subclasses. You can become the monster to fight the monsters, or blur the line between light and dark. New accursed lineages and backgrounds and new feats. Vassals of Vecna that have their own stat blocks and encounters, and curses that progress over time, and 30 new dangerous denizens and stat blocks, plus templates and archetypes for changing monsters into spooky undead sessions. There are also new spells and magic items, and you can find it all on the DM's Guild right now.
Very cool.